Okay, so I saw this on Twitter. They said, what album would you say profoundly reshaped the way you perceive music? And I have a couple. First up, I got Butterfly by Mariah Carey. This just blew me away just in terms of the soundscape of this album, the R&B, the hip hop, also the vocal layering on this I feel like is the best that I've ever heard on an album. And Mariah Carey certainly gave me that appreciation for vocal layering. It's always something that I listen for, always something that I deeply appreciate. And so this album I think is certainly a turning point for me. And then I also really appreciated her songwriting on here. It showed me you can have it all. Amazing vocals and amazing songwriting on here. So this is like my favorite album of all time, of course. And if you ask me to distill myself down to a few albums, I always have to say this one. Next up, The Velvet Rope by Janetjackson. I was just floored whenever I heard this album for the first time. The soundscape on here was insane and still is listening to it. And I was just so appreciative of what she did with this album and the alternative R&B that she had on here, and even the subject matter of her talking about her past and everything that she's been through. And it's just a very creative album, and I feel like you don't get a lot of great albums if you don't get this one, and I really appreciate what she did with this album, something I've loved from first listen. Renaissance Beyonce, this was such a cohesive experience and still is. And I thought it was a good album whenever I first listened to it, but the more that I have come back to it, I was like, it's excellent. It was my album of the year that year, and this is just really a masterclass on cohesion, and I love all the different genres that she employed on this album. Everything still sounds like her. It was a great moment in songwriting and production. It all just fits really well, and I love Lemonade, but this blew Lemonade out of the water, and this is just a case of a great later career album in my opinion. 1989 by Taylor Swift. This is actually the first album that I've heard by Taylor Swift, and this is one of the first albums I ever really remember listening to all the way through. And as I said before, this is one of my pop bibles, one of my favorite pop albums ever. If you ask me to pick some of my favorite albums of all time, 1989 is going to be there every single time. This just really honed in my appreciation of pop music, and whenever people say is something a pop bible, I'm comparing it to stuff like 1989, A Rhythm Nation 1814 by Janet Jackson, A Daydream by Mariah Carey. Like, this set the standard for me. The amount of hits that she had on this album, the songwriting and how catchy that was, but she also had introspection on there times too. I could appreciate the vocal performances for what they are. We all know Taylor Swift's not that great of a vocalist, let's be serious with ourselves, but I just really appreciate this album at the time, and I still do. And I think that this is one of Taylor Swift's best albums, and she was kind of ahead of her time with kind of calling back to the 80s pop era as well, so I can appreciate what she did with there, and just a great moment for pop music, it really is. So I always have a lot of praise for this album. It's one of the first albums that I ever really remember loving from front to back. Next up, I gotta pick the Beatles, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. I liked all the psychedelic things that they were doing on this one, especially on a song like Within You, Without You, for example, and stuff like that. So again, the kind of moments with the production here, which is something that's interesting to me and kind of showed me that there's just so much you can do from that standpoint as well, and I appreciate the songwriting on this album generally. Next up, Michael Jackson, Thriller. I really appreciate this album because he really honed everything in and made a great album with all killer, no filler, which is really hard to do. It still sounds great, has very ambitious vocal performances. I like the production on here a lot. Songwriting on here is incredible as well. And I think that is just really important in that standpoint. Whenever you want to talk about an album that changed the game, you're going to talk about Thriller. I mean, selling over 100 million copies, that is nothing to scoff at. I'm pretty sure this is the best-selling album of all time, and it shows why Michael Jackson is one of the best of all time. Some people, they work their entire career to have 9 great songs. He has them on one album. And I just have to appreciate the brilliance that he did on that. And this album just really shows me a musician who took his craft very seriously and was only going to give you his best. So I really appreciate it from that standpoint. And musically, it's influenced so many. And I love the music videos and the performances and all those things. Like, he just really set the blueprint. In the Key of Life, Stevie Wonder, it just made me appreciate his talents as an instrumentalist, as a singer, and as a songwriter, and just wow, what a wonderful moment. And I think it's one of the best albums of its era. So just kind of blew me away by how many great songs are on this album back to back to back, and just shows his talent. Justin Timberlake, Future Sex Love Sounds. This one was just interesting to me because of all the electro R&B and the production that Timberlake employed on this album, and it was just so fascinating for me to listen to and just see all the different places that they were going to take it to, and then just hearing how Justin would write over the songs and his vocals was certainly very interesting to me, and it just kind of opened me up into the world of electro R&B, I would say. Next up, I got some May Continuum. So this one was really fascinating to me just because of all the guitar that he uses on this album. And I mean, throughout the entire discography, of course, I could even say the first album because of that. But just the way that he utilizes the guitar and just all the different instrumentation that he can come up with and just the way that he layers his guitars is something that's always been fascinating to me. And I'm also a guitar player myself, and anybody who plays guitar knows how hard the John Mayer songs are to play. And so I can just really appreciate him as an instrumentalist, and I just really like the songs off of this album a lot. And I feel like if you listen to him and you play guitar, he kind of just makes you a better guitar player because he thinks of things so unconventional and outside of the box. So those were my picks for the albums that I would say profoundly reshape the way that I perceive music in terms of production, in terms of vocal stylings and all those kind of things. Just albums that push the boundary in one way or another. And there's a lot of albums that I love, but that's different from kind of changing how I think about music. And I think there's so many things that people can do and have done and will continue to do, and I just like people who kind of went outside of the box. And some of these albums, I would say they definitely are ones that I hold close to my heart, and ones that if I had to describe my taste, I would have to mention them. So Mariah Carey, Butterfly, Janet Jackson, The Velvet Rope, and Taylor Swift, 1989. And I really do enjoy the rest of these albums as well. That's kind of just my landscape of it, at least. And I think all these albums just made me have a greater appreciation for music overall and what you can do. So let me know what you guys think of my picks down below in the comments. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? And let's continue that conversation.